Good evening, everyone. Ian Patrick here, and tonight I have a special movie review for you all. And I say it's special because it is the one and only film that Clark Gable and Carole Lombard filmed together, one of Hollywood's most beloved couples of all time, in my opinion. Tonight's review is of No Man of Her Own, and this came out in 1932. It's a romance film made by Paramount, and it's kind of interesting that it's Paramount because everyone knows Clark Gable as the king of MGM, but MGM actually loaned Clark Gable out to Paramount to make this movie. Another interesting thing is that Carole Lombard wasn't the the first choice to play the leading female role. It was originally going to be Miriam Hopkins in this, but she just couldn't handle being second billed under Clark Gable. So I'm very thankful for that because we get to see Clark Gable and Carole Lombard in live action together for about an hour and 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So, like I said, their only film, and I knew nothing about this movie when that's usually how it is for me when I go into these old movies. I don't know. I try not to read anything or know anything about the story. It's much more fun when you go in blind. So this movie starts out where we quickly learn that Clark Gable is a card shark gambler. And it's sort of interesting how they let the viewer know because we just see him playing cards with a bunch of gentlemen and they all leave and yes, Mr. Smith, yes, Mr. Whatever, and they all leave, and then Clark Gable he comes back to where they were playing cards, and he's just like furious because apparently they almost lost the jackpot, and we're like, okay, this is the Gable we know. He's a crook, especially considering we just watched in the channel. We just watched another movie where Clark Gable was playing a con man. So, but in this, he's a card shark, and so Clark Gable then learns that the police are on his tail, hot on his tail, and he thinks, okay, well, I'm gonna lay low a little bit, and he randomly chooses a small town. I believe it was called Glenville. And he goes to this small town just randomly on a train, and he's just walking through the town, and he sees at a kiosk a beautiful woman, and of course it's Carole Lombard, and she's just this small town sweet girl who dreams of making it out of the town one day. And I have to say that in this movie, this might be the least likable character I've ever seen Clark Gable play because I just think he's such a creep for the majority of the movie. Because when he sees Carole Lombard at the kiosk, it's sort of creepy because he's just like staring at her. He's staring at her while she's purchasing, I can't remember, a magazine or something. And she's just like, kind of like, what's going on? Why is this guy looking at me? But she probably thinks he's attractive. But anyway, he then essentially asks the kiosk guy, who is she? Who is she? And then he learns she's the librarian. He stalks her to the library and he's so aggressive in this movie. That's the other thing about, he just comes on to Carole Lombard's character, Connie, and his name is Babe Stewart. Not the best name, but of course, very gambler con man like name, Babe. But anyway, he just comes onto her way too strong, and like in the aisles of the library he's just like so close. I mean, I guess it's Clark Gable, he's a good looking guy, I get that, but it was just too strong in this movie. But Carole Lombard, she seems uncomfortable in some of these scenes, but she eventually, gives in later in the movie, of course. But I want to note this this library scene because I thought it was beautifully photographed, because there was a scene where the camera had a overhead shot of essentially the entire library, and you could see like Carole Lombard over here and then Clark Gable kind of creepily walking over here. And it was cool how they eventually met and he kissed her without her consent, but that's a Clark Gable thing to do. But it's just a beautiful scene to note, my favorite scene in the entire movie. And he learns, because she says, "I'll see you in church," and then he stalks her in the church. And it's actually funny because how he sits next to Carole Lombard and her whole family in the church. He's just so aggressive and just so confident in himself in this. And then he eventually stalks her to a lake house party, and this is where they eventually kiss, and she wants to marry him, so they do a coin flip to see, like, if he wins the coin toss, then they won't get married. If she wins, they get married. And she wins the coin toss. And I want to note, it's kind of eerie to think, in this movie they did the coin toss. It's eerie to think because in real life, Carole Lombard passed away due to a coin toss, because she was traveling with her mother and she really wanted to get home and see her husband at the time, Clark Gable. She wanted to see him. So she flipped a coin, and if she won, they would take a flight to see Clark faster. And if her mother won, they would take, I think, a train. So she won, they took the flight, and very tragically, Carole Lombard and her mom passed away due to this coin toss. So just a little eerie thing to note, but it's the coin toss is a sweet thing in this movie, so it is nice thinking about it like that. So at this point in the movie, they're married, but Clark Gable is still not likable, because right when they move back to New York, to the hustle and bustle of New York, he says something to his partner in crime. She's being a sweet gal. I'll get rid of her eventually. I'll send her back. Maybe send her back with a little bit of money, but she's been a great gal. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like, I hate this guy. I hated Clark Gable the majority of the movie. Eventually, spoiler, not a huge spoiler, Clark Gable, babe, he changes his ways and becomes a good person, and he does like 3 months in prison to get rid of all the charges against him so he can live an honest life with Carole Lombard as his wife. And I didn't really care for the ending. It just went a little too fast for me. But in this book, it says, even at Paramount's carefree empire, Gable had to be made an honest man by the time the folks were sent home from the theater. He renounces his crooked ways, serves a 90-day sentence, and comes back to Lombard, a good man. Which is pretty typical with Clark Gable movies. But hey, a woman like Carole Lombard could change any man to be better, I think. She was so sweet and angelic in this movie, and they're a good match to each other. I would give this movie a solid 3 stars. The story was nothing life-changing. The story wasn't too interesting. However, the pure love connection between Clark and Carole, and just as huge fan of the two, like, just the opportunity to see them work together, it'll keep you glued to the screen. And it's awesome that they're in so many wonderful scenes together. Some interesting things about this movie is that at the end of production, they weren't married at the time, by the way. She was married to William Powell at the time. And I've read different things. I've read that she was happily married to him at the time, but I've also read that she was not happy with her marriage at the time. I would think probably unhappy at the time. And he was married to a Texas socialite, very wealthy woman, I don't know how to say her name, Longam or something. And he was definitely unhappy with his marriage. It was known that he was cheating on her pretty much the whole marriage. But after filming, he sent Carole Lombard ballerina slippers with a note that said, "To a true prima donna," because they sort of butt heads on the movie, and apparently he didn't really approve of Carole Lombard, like spoke really foul language, like cussed a lot, and she was just a tomboy. But he would eventually learn this about her because they both loved to hunt and hike, and it just made their marriage that much better because she was such a tomboy. And in response to that, Carole Lombard sent Clark Gable a big piece of ham with his picture on the piece of ham. And they would send each other gag gifts throughout their entire marriage because they were both playful and fun. And so that would carry on into their future when they would marry 4 years later. So I have some beautiful pictures from the film. That's a scene from the movie. And this, I don't think this is from the movie, but maybe on the set. I love this picture. And then I have that's when she's telling him to wake up early and go to work, honey, and he's so annoyed by it. And then this beautiful picture. But lovely movie, especially considering they had a lovely marriage later on. Definitely highly recommend it. My next film review coming up isn't a Clark Gable movie, but I think eventually I'll have reviewed all of Clark Gable's movies just because I'm such a huge fan of him. But hope you enjoy the film and the review. Please leave a like and comment, because let me know what you think of the movie or send me a recommendation. But have a good night, everyone.